ama. Está andando pelo passeio do canal que divide a cidade. Algumas barcaças navegando lentamente nas primeiras horas da manhã. À esquerda está a passarela de inspiração náutica com tábuas estilo convés e torres tipo mastros. À direita está a curva do rio que se volta para o leste depois da ponte Waterloo, em direção ao dono de Catedral St. Paul. Ela sente o sol começar a se erguer. No ar, ainda uma brisa antes de a cidade ficar entupida de calor e fumaça. Uma violonista toca alguma coisa devidamente inspiradora mais adiante no passeio. A peça de Ama, a última amazona do reino de Daomé, estreia no Teatro Nacional essa noite.
Chegou um ponto em que os habitantes de Marte não podiam mais negar o aquecimento do seu planeta ou a escala da destruição que estava por vir. Em uma última tentativa desesperada de preservar sua civilização, eles construíram vastos canais conectando os polos do planeta à grande extensão de terra arrasada que cobriu o resto da superfície. O degelo anual das camadas de gelo polares produziria a água necessária para o cultivo de alimentos suficiente para a sobrevivência de pelo menos mais uma geração.
Educação indígena. A educação na aldeia indígena começa desde a primeira idade. Não segue os padrões de sala de aula. É um aprender sem pressa na solidariedade. Aprende que a agitação da formiga e o canto do sapo indicam que a chuva vem aí. Aprende a apreciar desde pequeno um bom peixe assado com vinho de açaí. Aprende que na arte de pescar só se pesca o que vai precisar. E a calma é importante para a flecha no peixe acertar. Aprende com os mais velhos nossa memória viva, com os espíritos conversar e deles a permissão receber para na mata entrar.
Eu não tinha porra nenhuma pra fazer lá. Quer dizer, por que será que moro com a minha ex-namorada, sua nova namorada e a ex-namorada dela? Como é que alguém pode se sentir bem assim? Eu poderia estar escrevendo essa história de uma cela de cadeia. Engraçado, né? Ted e Alice, antes da minha partida, disseram: nada é tão ruim que não possa piorar ele. Eu não sabia mais o que fazer. Peguei um voo sim, eu fiz isso. Pra Portland. E a Julie e a Chris me buscaram no aeroporto. Eu estava muito doidona no avião.
Encontrei ela ali, hoje de manhã, de barriga para cima. Revelou Dona Elodia, indicando um ponto na praia onde se juntava o lixo que o mar trazia ou desenterrava. Troncos, sacolas plásticas, garrafas. Envenenada? Acho que sim. O que fizeram com ela? Enterraram? Dona Elodia fez que sim com a cabeça e disse: meus netos. Lá em cima, no cemitério? Não, aqui mesmo, na praia. Muitos cães do povoado morriam envenenados. Havia quem dissesse que eram mortos de propósito, mas Damares não podia acreditar que existissem pessoas capazes de fazer algo assim e achava que os cachorros comiam por engano as iscas com veneno deixadas para os ratos, ou comiam os ratos, que por estarem envenenados eram caçados com facilidade. Sinto muito, disse Damares.
O imenso moedor está triturando animais mortos recolhidos nas estradas. Tanto o barulho do motor quanto dos ossos sendo esmagados ricocheteiam nas paredes altas do galpão. A mistura de som e fedor enfurece os sentidos. Edgar Wilson deixa o carrinho no lugar delimitado por um retângulo pintado no chão e sobe os degraus de uma escadinha de alumínio que dá acesso à caçamba do moedor, de onde é possível ver o lado de dentro. Consegue ver o que é? Grita um funcionário afastando o protetor auditivo. Não estou vendo nada, grita de volta Edgar Wilson. Desde cedo tá assim, agarrando. Mas não estou vendo nada.
Sobre o autoritarismo brasileiro. Lilia Moritz Schwartz. Demorei aqui, Escravidão e racismo. No Brasil, o sistema escravocrata transformou-se num modelo tão enraizado que acabou se convertendo numa linguagem com graves consequências. Graçou por aqui, do século XVI ao XIX, uma escandalosa injustiça amparada pela artimanha da legalidade. Como não havia nada em nossa legislação que vetasse ou regulasse tal sistema, ele se espraiou por todo o país, entrando firme nos costumes da terra. Imperou no nosso território uma grande bastardia jurídica, a total falta de direitos de alguns ante a imensa concentração de poderes nas mãos de outros. Fim.
Se alguém for um espírito guardião, mandado pela primeira vez para habitar um hospedeiro que veio ao mundo em Humaniá, uma cidade na terra dos grandes pais, a primeira coisa a surpreender o espírito seria a imensidão da terra. Quando o espírito guardião desce, com o corpo reencarnado do novo hospedeiro em direção à terra, o que se revela ao olho é assombroso. Subitamente, como se alguma cortina primordial fosse aberta, estamos expostos a uma extensão de vegetação verde e luxuriante.
Quando retirei a faca da mala de roupas, embrulhada em um pedaço de tecido antigo e encardido, com nódoas escuras e um nó no meio, tinha pouco mais de 7 anos. Minha irmã, Belonísia, que estava comigo, era mais nova há 1 ano. Pouco antes daquele evento, estávamos no terreiro da casa antiga brincando com bonecas feitas de espiga de milho colhidas na semana anterior. Aproveitávamos as palhas que já amarelavam para vestir feito roupas nos sabugos. Falávamos que as bonecas eram as nossas filhas, filhas de Bibiana e Belonísia.
primeiramente de Aúde, que é bom dia, né? Meu nome é Eva, meu nome indígena é Diramirim, e eu sou Guarani, minha etnia, e também eu tenho 52 anos, e a gente viemos do Sul, quando eu tinha 5 anos de idade, eu fui criado com pajé, cheguei aqui quando eu tinha 13 anos de idade. Para ser uma liderança
In order to be a leadership or a chief, a woman chief, the woman has to be respected. First of all, you have to be respected by your community within your own tribe, and then you have to be respected by the outsiders. So this belongs to my father, and it was handed to me so that I would move forward with the struggle and to champion my people. So this is the work I do today. Later, I might become a woman chief, but I'm not ready yet.
Na verdade, eu trabalho um pouco com remédio medicina.
I work also with natural medication. And no one taught me this. I learned it through my dreams. And this is the book we follow. This is what is written to us. To us, a book is just a piece of paper that was left to go down in history. But we have to hear the voices from above. The voices from above are the ones we have to listen to. And one day I might become a shaman. Where is our book? It is in our memory, in the memory of our elders, of the shamans. But today, I believe this can be found in books. Memories are now found in books. So Flip is where we try and look for history, try to find history of those who came before us, or maybe those that will follow us. It can be from now to the future. And this is what matters for the youngsters today. We have to leave this memory for them. I always talk about history to my children, for the teenagers in my tribe. Every Friday, I organize a reading group to tell them stories for the community. And I have to pass down this history to them. The same thing as Flip, but then it's culture, it's literature, it's a different culture. Yes, you do it in your own way, says the reporter. She says, yes, exactly. The Ministry of Tourism and Casa Azul introduced the 18th Literary Festival of Paraty. The project is supported by the Culture Incentive Law, Vale Mais Cultura, with the sponsorship of Itaú. We have the support of the municipality of Paraty, Pinheiro Neto and Associates, and UOL. By Casa Azul, Special Culture Secretariat, Ministry of Tourism, and Brazil.
Esta mesa é ao vivo e perguntas aos...
This roundtable is live and questions can be submitted throughout our broadcast through our chat box on the YouTube channel. At the end of the meeting, some of your questions will be addressed directly to the authors. Have a good flip. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Jennifer Thomas. I am a journalist. I was a reporter for Veja magazine for 7 years, and I specialized in environment issues. Today, I am part of the Momento magazine, and this will be launched in 2021. And I also collaborate with other editorial brands such as Claudia and other magazines. I will mediate this conversation. It is Flip's third roundtable, and it's called Living Forests. We have North American author Jonathan Safran Foer, who recently launched We Are the Environment, We Are the Climate, and also uh, Eating Animals. And they were awarded the Garden First book. Jonathan is always in between fiction and not fiction, talking about current issues that have to do with our major agenda. He was born in Washington, lives in Brooklyn, and he is a professor of creative writing at New York University. We also have the poet and researcher Márcia Kambeba. She will launch in December Saberes da Floresta, Forest Knowledge, and she talks about education from the perspective of the native population. Marcia was born in a Ticuna village, and she lived there until she was 8, when she moved with her family to São Paulo. São Paulo de Oliveira in the Amazon region. She has a diploma in geography, and she has a master's degree at the Federal University of Amazonas. Jonathan, you are a novelist. You always use data from our reality in your fiction. Now you have your second nonfiction book. How do you choose how you're going to write, if it's going to be fiction or nonfiction?
Well, first, let me just say thank you for hosting me at this event. I was in Paraty about, I know exactly how long ago it was. It was about 14 years ago, because my son just started to crawl at that festival. And now he is taller than me. So that's how long it's been since I was at this festival. About half of my family lives in Brazil, in Sao Paulo. So it's a place that I feel very close to and always eager to return to. And Marcia, thank you for joining me also in this conversation. It's very nice to meet you and get to speak with you. So how do I decide about fiction and nonfiction, or how do I move between them? There's an old saying that once upon a time, there was a person whose life was so good, there's no story to tell about it. Stories are always born out of some kind of problem, something not being resolved, or some kind of lack of peace. I have a lot of those, both in my inner life and in my community and in the world that I live in. So I approach books as a way to try to find a little bit more peace or resolution. In the case of fiction, I can't articulate always what the problem is. It's just something that I intuitively feel. And in a way, a novel is an effort not to solve a problem, but just to describe a problem with metaphors and characters and drama. With nonfiction, I do know what the problem is. And I want to set aside a time and space to give my attention to it. So in the case of this last book, We Are the Weather, the problem was, what does it mean to be an individual in this time of climate crisis?
Obrigada. Márcia, o Saberes da Floresta
Thank you, Márcia. Saberes da Floresta, you talk about the native culture, and but it also has other disciplines with different uses of language, poetry, essays, illustration. Also, your education is very broad. So, how important is it to you to have all these multiple disciplines in you? Well, first of all, I would like to thank Flip for this other invitation. Last year, I was also participating, launching the book Ai Kakiri Tama, the second edition. And I would like to thank also Jonathan and say it's such a pleasure to be here with you, to be together with you, to hold hands, especially to talk together about this topic about, living forest, the living forest that we native people fight for here. It's a constant struggle. We give our blood, our sweat. We have to resist so that our forests will remain living. So the interdisciplinarity, of course, is essential. And yes, I do an interdisciplinary work because my words, my texts don't talk only about geography. My essays will go through anthropology, history, identity. The importance is exactly in that. We have to embrace, we have to include all the different audiences, publics, so that we can participate not only in universities and school, but also being able to reach and to have a dialogue with other publics, with those who love and are dedicated and want to participate in this dialogue, which is the dialogue I call the well-being with the native peoples. So, Saberes da Floresta, my book, as well as Lugar do Saber, also this book. This book here was launched or published and is more focused on deforestation. We have a poem here called Tempo do Clima, Time of the Climate, Time for Climate. And also, Saberes da Floresta is following the same lines, even though we talk about education. Everything to us is education. Everything to us is to learn and to respect nature, to, ask for permission whenever you go into a forest, to ask for permission every time you want to bathe in a river, to understand that we and the earth and nature and the biodiversity are one single body. It's an intrinsic relationship, and this is education. And Saberes da Floresta, the forest knowledge, is how we know that the forest is our first teacher. Jonathan, in your book, your most recent book, you also chose to use a more direct language, more based on facts and, straight to the point, so to speak, on climate issues. Why did you decide to tackle climate in such a way?
Climate is an issue that at this point in history, and it wasn't necessarily true 20 years ago or 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, but at this moment in history, we know what is happening and we can't pretend that we don't know. And yet the information doesn't seem to be enough to move us. The things that are in our minds remain in our minds rather than moving down to our hearts and out through our hands. And I feel this in my own life as well, that there is a person that I want to be. There is a person that I describe myself as being, both to others and to myself, even though I am all too often not that person. So I wanted to give some thought to why that's the case, why there are things that we can know but not believe. And in order to do that, I felt that the book had to be very personal, because even though the problem of climate change is, of course, based in science, it's still a personal problem. We have to respond to it as individuals. So I gave a lot of thought to storytelling, and I think the kind of interdisciplinary storytelling that Márcia is talking about, just as climate change is a very multifaceted problem that connects the deforestation of the Amazon with the wildfires in California, with the melting of the ice sheets in the Arctic, with climate refugees in Syria, with food droughts and famines in sub-Saharan Africa. It also is a multifaceted problem inside of us. And we have so many different identities, each of us inside of us. We are citizens. We are, some of us, parents, some of us, all of us, children. Some of us have partners. Some of us think of ourselves as having a national or a religious identity. And so the complexity of the problem outside of us has to somehow meet up with the complexity of what's inside of us. And my best approach for doing that was to try to have a very broad and full kind of storytelling. You know, in this book, We Are the Weather, there's quite a bit of information, but I also talk about the birth of my child. I talk about the death of my grandmother, which happened in the process of writing the book. And I tell an awful lot of stories that might seem like they are departing from the point. But I think the point is not always where we think it will be. You know, we think that it's as simple as you learn something and then you act on it. But it's obvious that it's not that simple. And I'm not here speaking about ignorant people or what we might call bad people who deny the existence of climate change or who deny that they have any role to play in the solution. I'm talking about good people who know what the science is, who want to participate in the healing of the planet, and yet don't. So how are those people reached?
Sim. Fazendo também outro paralelo,
So
né, Márcia?
now, in another parallel, in an interview with the chief of Paraty Mirim in the opening of this roundtable, she said the books of her tribe are the stories of their ancestral guard. So, what is the role of oral history in the Native population education, and how would a book participate in this context? Also, how can history or stories save the world, Marcia?
Oralidade, de fato.
Yes, we are definitely oral people. Until now, until today, in the 21st century, we still remain oral. Our storytelling, our narratives are always, told at the end of the day under a tree, or maybe in the house of one of our ancestors, one of our elderly, and the children will come in and they will listen to that narrative. They will participate in that narrative, and that is essential and important. It is important also to record, draw it, to record it somewhere. This is what represents to us literature, the writing. We were taught to draw our thoughts. They presented to us this tool. And this today, as my relative said in the opening video, this is used in classrooms, inside and outside your tribe, your village. You need to record these knowledges, this history. Can you imagine? We lose one of our elderly every day. We are living through COVID-19 pandemic, and many Native and elderly people of our villages and people were victims of COVID-19. And to us, each elderly who dies is a living memory. It's like a book. It's like a book that died. Each elderly will bring with him or herself knowledge that we sometimes have no time to convey to the younger generations. So every time we talk to one of the elders, we learn a little bit more, and we work as if it were literature. Like Jonathan, I also work with storytelling. I tell stories, I write essays about Curupira, Machinta, all legendary figures. For some is a fiction or myth. For us, it isn't. It is our culture. It is part of our memory of what is sacred in our people. So it is essential to register, to record this. So to find this balance between storytelling, oral history, and literature is essential to us. It is, bringing together two worlds. It is bringing together two different knowledges. So I'm able to bring this into what I do. I also tell stories. As you said, I'm a performer too, and I create characters and I bring them to life. And this is essential for us to be able to show to our children, to our elders, to the adult population, to have them learn a little bit more about the sacred beings of the forest.
This year, in addition to the deforestation and the fires in the Amazon, we had dramatic images of the situation in the Pantanal swamplands. the wetlands in Brazil. It's a disaster. Give us the feeling of disconnect from the majority of the population and nature and the biomes in Brazil. Jonathan, you talk a lot about this in your last book. I'd like for you to expound more on how this distance and alienation between people and the environment, how it interferes in the environmental cause.
Well, it's interesting why it is that, it's something I've thought about a lot in the last couple of months, why it is that individuals and governments and communities have responded to COVID in the way that they have, and why that response is so different than the response to climate change, even though we actually have known far more about climate change than we know about COVID. And as horrible and as tragic as COVID is, it's nowhere near as horrible or as tragic as the loss of the planet. Nothing could possibly be as horrible or as tragic as the loss of the planet. New York City shut down, completely shut down. All businesses closed for a period of time. Schools closed for many months. Individuals and families stayed inside for many months. They wouldn't see each other. You know, I didn't see my brothers. I didn't see my parents. People died alone because of the need to be safe. Economies were completely trampled during this period for something that, again, we know far less about and is far less destructive than climate change. And so why is that? And I think it's because of this distance that you mentioned. In the case of COVID, however unlikely it is that we gathered here will die from COVID, we are afraid of it. We are personally afraid of it. And I think that the response corresponds to our personal fear. In the case of climate change, for most Americans, and this is not the case for most citizens of the world, but most Americans are not personally afraid about climate change. So in order to care about it, we have to either make a leap of empathy to people living halfway around the world in places like Bangladesh, where they're already suffering so much, or we have to make a leap of empathy into the future to our grandchildren or great-grandchildren who will suffer, or we have to make a kind of ultimate leap of empathy to nature itself, which I'm not even sure most people are capable of. If Donald Trump had said, we need to close down the economy, we need to close down schools and restaurants, we need people to stay inside for several months, otherwise people in Bangladesh are going to get coronavirus, I don't think that ever would have happened. And if Donald Trump had said, we need Americans to wash their hands, just wash your hands carefully, otherwise people in Bangladesh are going to get coronavirus, I don't think people would have even washed their hands. Maybe that says something horrible about humankind, or maybe it just says something true about humankind, that we find it very difficult to make these leaps of empathy, which is why, as all three of us have now been talking about today, why it's so important to tell the stories, not just to convey information, but to make empathy easier. The Polish poet Zbigniew Herbert said, the imagination is the instrument of compassion. Science is very good at convincing us of things, but it's not necessarily good at making us compassionate. I think sharing our stories and sharing our imaginations is one way to encourage that necessary leap of empathy.
Indo agora pouco para talvez
Moving now and shifting to the opposite terrain of what Jonathan just said, but I would like to know from you too, what's the role of spirituality and dreams in the relationship and the defense of the environment, perhaps thinking more of the indigenous culture and traditions, talking a little bit about how what's the relationship for you between spirituality and the defense of the environment? We indigenous people, everything for us is related to spirituality. You can't dissociate spirituality. Our life here on planet Earth, nature is spirituality. It's all interconnected in this common home. It's a very intrinsic relationship. And since I just heard my relative speaking in the opening video, I hear from many people's, and it happens with me, many of my poems, they are born precisely from the dream of this relationship between the physical world and the spiritual world. All of us are the territory of the sacred. All of us have spirituality. But, Jenny, in the indigenous people's culture, this is taught to us since we're tiny children. This photograph that you're showing there, which the team is showing there, is a photograph. I'm a photographer. It's a photograph of my own that I myself took. It's precisely this relationship with the water, and the wisdom of the forest talks much about the forest. This education by the forest, this pedagogy coming from the waters. Our spirituality is closely linked to water. Our cosmology is linked to water. We, the Kambeba, are the people of the waters. We are born from a drop of water, which drops down from the trees. It falls into the river, and the Kambeba is born. That's beautiful. That is linked intrinsically to spirituality. And our music, our literature, and even our language, our speech, how and what to say comes directly from spirituality. It has to. That's why the rattles, the maraca rattles are essential, made from gourds, the gourd rattles, the maracas. It's important to hear and feel the sound of the maraca rattle because it opens the gateway linking the physical to the spiritual world, and spirituality comes and makes things happen with us. What has to happen, it makes it happen. We need to believe, even in the 21st century, that we are not alone. We have all of this spirituality that orients us and bears us forward and struggles with us and resists with us. And literature, it is the fruit of this understanding and this connection and this channel between man and spirituality. I am a composer as well. Many of my songs come from dreams. Many of my poems come from dreams. But now I'm saying this more openly because my relative said I have a documentary here, which is called Doc of the Indigenous Legends. A few people here from the Xingu Park here in the north of Brazil, and they say this: we dream at night the music, the song that we have to sing with the warriors the next day. A song born of dreams, this connection with the dreams. And some people call this or transposition of dreams. In a word, there are many terms, but that's important. We call it a connection, like a spiritual oniric connection through the elements that allow this. This is a tawari. It's a tawari straw. We have tobacco inside this, and it's used to smoke. And the shaman uses it for spiritual cures and to connect to spirituality. And that is how we lead our world, not only the cultural world, not only identity and ancestrality, even living in the cities, even when we're living in the cities. Okay, Jonathan, do you have a time? You have a time in your book when you speak specifically about the time that you pray and where you seek God. What's this relationship, considering the connection between spirituality and this climate and environmental issue as well?
Well, the truth is, I don't don't believe in God, and my prayer is very empty because it's born out of a need, you know, rather than a relationship or any kind of gratitude. And it's so interesting listening to what Marcia had to say, because the American, my mother was an immigrant, but I was born in America, and I have always lived in America. And the American relationship to spirituality in the year 2020 is just non-existent. There is absolutely no connection to the other, whether the other is a human community or the animal community or nature itself. And we tell a lie that, you know, these things make us connected, which of course isn't true. We are experiencing historically unprecedented levels of depression, of isolation, of alienation. And we have proven that we are more successful than any other people in the history of humankind have been at attaining wealth and attaining power. But we have not attained either significance in our lives or happiness in our lives. And I think we're paying the price for it now. The environmental catastrophe, which America is more responsible for than any country in the world, is both a literal catastrophe. We are literally losing the planet. And it's also a symbolic catastrophe. It's a kind of projection of a death that has happened inside of us. So I was struck both by how foreign Marcia's description of spirituality was to my own experience, and also how jealous I felt. I know so many people who long to feel more connected in the ways that that are fundamental in that matter.
Bom, as fotos que estão sendo
Well,
mostradas
the photographs that are shown on the Amazon and the Pantanal wetlands have been lent by Vitor Muriano, the photographer. And Jonathan, going back to your book, We Are the Weather, a quote of yours says the following: the greatest revenge against a genocide, to eradicate someone, is to eradicate their people, is to create a family. The greatest revenge. Jonathan, what do you mean with this in the context of global warming?
Well, my grandmother, I was talking about that in the context of my grandmother's life story. My grandmother was born in Eastern Europe, and everybody in her family was murdered during the war. Her parents, her aunts and uncles, her grandparents, all of her brothers and sisters, all of her friends. She was the only person who survived. And when I was a little boy, I would often spend the night at her house. And she would sometimes say to me, "You are my revenge." And it's such a strange thing to hear. And it's such a strange identity to have to hold. And what she meant was the goal of the Nazis was to destroy all Jewish people on the earth. And her form of revenge or compensation was to have a family of her own and to repopulate. The revenge that I was talking about in my book was the revenge of nature itself. You know, there are many people who speak of COVID in this way. There are many people who speak of the superstorms that are now hitting the American coasts with unprecedented frequency in that way. We have injured the planet in our attempts to kill the planet. People often ask, will we be able to save the planet? The planet doesn't need us to save it. The planet is going to survive after us. The question is, will there be humans on the planet in the future? We mistakenly talk about the destruction of the earth when what we're really talking about is the destruction of humankind. And when we talk about the destruction of humankind, we are also talking about our dependency on the planet. We have no other home to go to. We have no other way to live except in some kind of sustainable harmony with our planet. We are far out of harmony right now. The imbalance is extreme, and we are being punished for it.
Bom, Márcia, acho que os termos.
Okay, Marcia, I think that the genocide, ethnocide are common words when we think of the struggle of the indigenous cause. I'd like to know from you, Marcia, how do you feel that this affects this extermination, systematic extermination of the indigenous peoples? Does it affect your will to have a family? Do you feel this amongst the indigenous peoples? How does this play out for you? Doesn't affect me, my desire to have a family, because I already have a family. So, and we're a big family. We realize the issue of family and perceive it. Our time is circular, and based on that, we begin to see the way of thinking obeys this circularity of the maracá, rattles, and time, and education, as I say in my book, and learning and wisdom of the forest. So family, it was presented to us by our connection with animals. According to the elders, we learned to speak with the bird from the birds. So it was listening to the birds that we learned to, and imitating the birds that we learned to speak. And now the ways that we teach this verbalization of ours, that's how it began, from learning from the birds. From the birds, we learn to care, to have affection, and the relationship in a family. Monkeys, for example, the mother monkey teaches the baby monkey how to survive in the forest. She goes, picks the fruit, but the monkeys, when as they grow, they pick the fruit themselves. So the animals' autonomy, animals have to teach their offspring, we also learn. That is because when a child is born, when they're 2 years old, they already begin to row the canoe. So the canoe, they exercise in the children, their body, and their bones, and their build, independence, and searching for food, their connection to the river. So there's lots that we learn. And for us, it's totally different. You know, Jenny, we have this another notion. It's a concept of society itself. There are rituals which mark the passage of this phase from child to adulthood. But girls, when they first menstruate, the boys go with the older men to enter the forest and understand adventure in the spirituality for each, and each tree has its own spirit. That's why you have to ask for permission to enter, to cut down a tree, even to make a house, to cut down a tree to make a canoe. You have to ask permission because you're going to cut down a tree. The tree is like a sister spirit. This is also taught to the children. And when the child reaches this age, this phase, they're already fit to raise their own family. But in order to have their own family, they have to understand their responsibility, what it means to be a family, to understand as well that all the collective is a great family. In the village, one person cares for the other. We're not individualists. If you have nothing, you don't go hungry, but people who have food shares with everyone else. A very interesting fact happened when I was doing my master's course. I took a bunch of banana, and a watermelon that someone had left for the other realm, and he was sick. And so the elders, they are treated very well. They are the center of attention together with the children. And so I took the bananas and I said, I brought this for you. I gave it to one of the elders. He took the banana and the watermelon and said, call all the children, gather them together here, gather them around. And I did what he asked. I gathered them around. I didn't know what he was going to do. He split the banana in the middle, each banana. He split it and divided it amongst and shared it with everyone. He asked me to slice the watermelon, and I did that. Everybody ate the bananas and the watermelon at that moment, and nobody saved anything for later. That act, with that act, he told me, this is what it means to be a family. This is what it means to be people. It's solidarity. It's sharing and union. So I understood right then that nothing is mine. Everything is ours.
Jonathan and Márcia, the two of you talk a lot about your grandparents throughout the books, your work, your essays. So they were very important characters, people in your lives. So if you could maybe talk to us a little about the importance of your ancestors, of your elders in your work, and how did these women influence you?
Well, I can say it's not something I was always aware of at the time. It's something that I have become more and more aware of as I've gotten older. Before I became a writer, I would say I had actually very little awareness of it at all. I kind of took my grandmother for granted. She was the person that I was told to be nice to, the person that I was told to, praise the cooking of. I always recognized her as the patriarch of the family, but I'm not sure that I understood the extent to which it made me who I was, that she made me who I was. And when I started writing, I was shocked by how often I found myself writing about her. The poet W.H. Auden once said, I look at what I write so that I can see what I think. Maybe there are writers in the world who have these ideas of what they want to share, or arguments that they want to make, or characters that are living inside of themselves, and then through the act of writing, just share it with others. That's not the case for me. I usually don't know who I am, or I don't believe that I know who I am. And the process of writing is not so much sharing myself as discovering myself. And the great discovery, or one of the great discoveries in these 20 years of writing, has been the influence of my grandmother in particular. She is a connection to a world that I never knew, and a world that, were it not for World War II, would have been my world. I only live in America because of World War II. I only have the life that I have in New York City, in a house, taking the subway with my cell phone, all of these things. They feel inevitable, but there's nothing inevitable about them. It was all historical contingencies that created me, you could say. But when you remove all of those historical contingencies, when you remove the wars and you remove technology and you remove, the advancement of culture, what you have is your people. And the older I get, I think the more aware I am of that my people are literally my ancestors. But then I've grown to have a much more expansive notion of what my people includes, to include people who come from quite different places, have quite different backgrounds. And, when I really try very hard, and this is a leap of empathy, again, that it is not effortless. But when I try very hard, my people can include even animals, and can include even nature itself.
Bom, eu vou falar, né?
Well, so let me talk a little bit about that too. It's good to know that Jonathan Book also brings this relation with his grandmother. In my case, I was raised by my grandmother. I was born in Belém dos Solimões, my village, and then we moved to São Paulo. That's my grandmother there. My grandmother, she was and still is this woman. I need her inspiration every time I need to make a decision, because I'm not just a writer, I'm not just a singer, I'm not just a photographer, I'm not just an activist. I am also the educator. I go to my classrooms, I go to our villages, I go to our tribes, and then we, all the struggle we have for our rights and health and safety and everything. So we are fighting for something bigger than us, the right we have also to live in the cities if we wish so. And I learned this with this woman. She was the first professor, I mean, the first teacher in the village I lived in Belém dos Solimões, in the Amazon region. So it was with her that I've learned about love for poetry. She would write poetry so that I could read them for the tourists. I was a 7-year-old girl. I didn't know how to read or write. I only learned how to read or write when I was 8 or 9 years old. And she was a teacher. But she would teach, but I would have to stay home. I did not go to the classroom. I wouldn't go with her to class. So she would be showing me what it was also to be an activist in tough times where we still were living the end of our dictatorship here in Brazil. So I started writing when she came into my life. And I bring in my book, Saberes da Floresta, a little bit about this reality of my grandmother as an educator, how I became also an educator, a composer because of her. And how my class happens within our village, how I bring education to the people with whom I work by UEPA, the University of Pará. And this is important because because of the question you asked before, so that we can fight against genocide, ethnocide that still persists with Native peoples. Until 2000, it was the government's order that everyone in Brazil, our peoples, would be extinct. And we are resisting. And this is why we hear a lot of, struggle and value our land, to have our reservations prepared and protected, because in the native population reserves is where we have another way of seeing the world. It's not the same one we have in the urban settings, because in urban settings you have capitalism, money is always in everyone's mind. So spirituality is lost. The intrinsic natural relations, or the relations with nature, is lost. And people always want more and more and more, of wanting more and generating, fertilizers that can be deadly. And then you also have lead in our rivers, everything that will impact us. We are the rational animal that will pollute ourselves. We drink pollution, we are pollution. So it is time that we bring about change. We have to change the way we work and act. The world needs us. We women will have to walk around with no hair because our water is killing us. It's not as clean as we thought. The Amazon is not the lungs of the world. It's not a green territory. It's not true. Amazon is a finite resource and it's being cut down. It is being violated in its rights. So it's time that we rethink. The Amazon does not belong to the Amazon itself. All of us who breathe, all of us who are alive, we are alive in a Pachamama, Gaia, Earth. I'm sorry about this outburst. Thank you for your words. And now, based on what you've said, next Monday, last Monday, INPE was showing the most recent data on deforestation in the Amazon. It increased 9.5% in 1 year. So I would like to know from you, Márcia, what does this mean to you, Márcia?
Mas o teu microfone está fechado.
É difícil falar, né?
It's difficult to talk about this. I feel moved. It's emotional to me. It's so hard, to see the wood being dragged, illegal timber being brought from native population, from reserves, and you see how we are in a constant struggle with, gold miners, with illegal timber, and the impact of deforestation that will just expel. We have women who are raped. A 5-year-old girl was raped in Barreirinhas, a native girl, and we didn't see that. She was killed. She was raped. She was killed, and we didn't hear about it. So this violence against the native population, and it happened, it didn't stop. It continues. It still happens. But who will give us a voice? Who will show this to others? The Amazon is not something that has to be protected, defended, championed only by the Quilombola population, by the native population. It is ours, to all of us. It belongs to everyone, should feel like they belong to the Amazon. You have to value it. You have to protect it. You have to feel what it means to have this connection with everything that is around you. No one, Jenny, is worried about, caring for that tree right in front of your house, or maybe in a public square. They do not consider it as their own tree. Caring for public spaces, the trees you find in a public square, caring for this environment around you, and it's a crying for help, the environment, and we scream along with it. COVID-19, going back to COVID-19, and it's a devastation around the world, as Jonathan was saying. It is definitely an issue, but there are so many other issues that we live, and they have been, we experiencing for so many years. Cars polluting the air, you have smog and smoke, and you have the ozone holes just happening, and we have to drink dirty water, polluted rivers. So what else? It's more than time. We have to act. We have to do something about this. Stop. Reflect about who you are in this world, and things will just become worse. They're not going to get any better if we don't do anything. Wherever there's a green area in the deforestation map, wherever you have a green area, it's either a quilombola, a native reserve, or it's just a protection area. Everything is up for grabs. Everything else is up for grabs. They did a flyover here at the state of Pará, in a certain area in Pará, the state of Pará, and the plane had to, it almost fell because it was just too much smoke. Too much smoke, always. So literature has to be the echo. It has to give voice to everyone, and that people please read it and understand it and do something. I don't want to become a bestseller author. I want to have a dialogue with people based on the knowledge, based here on this river. This is a picture I took myself. It's a village. But where is the knowledge? What are we talking about? What are the forest knowledges that I want inside me? What is the forest knowledge that I want to bring into my life? Let me just, Jonathan, how do you see this moment in within the Brazilian politics, and how do you see this in Brazil and also in the US and the rest of the world?
Well, I'm not the person to speak about Brazilian politics other than feeling some sympathy, because we have two of the worst leaders in the world. But when it comes to protecting the Amazon, we know why the Amazon is being destroyed. It's not a mystery. It's not ambiguous. And it's not impossible to stop. 91% of the deforestation of the Amazon is for the meat industry, and either to create land for cattle to graze or to create land to plant soybeans for the cattle to eat. It's a difficult conversation for a lot of people to have, especially in a culture that emphasizes meat eating, as Brazil does and as the United States does. If we are serious about saving the Amazon, then we have to be serious about eating differently. It's not to say that everybody has to become a vegetarian. It's not to say that we can't still have room for our traditional foods and meals and dishes, and that we can't respect those. But we have to eat far, far, far less than we're presently eating. This is not my opinion. It's not a poetic idea. This is what the scientists tell us. The IPCC, which provides climate science for the United Nations, has said that we have no hope of meeting the goals of the Paris Climate Accords unless we dramatically change how we eat. In 2018, the most comprehensive analysis of the relationship between food and the environment was published. And what the authors found was that while there are people who live in certain places in the world where there isn't sufficient nutrition and where they don't have access to other kinds of farming than animal farming, those people can eat a little bit more meat. But people who live in Europe and in the United States and in countries like Brazil, we need to eat about 90% less meat and about 60% less dairy in order to avoid what the authors called irreversible climate collapse. So it's easy for that conversation to feel politicized. It's easy for it to feel like animal rights advocacy, but it's the very, very basic science of climate change, and it's the most basic science of the destruction of the Amazon. It is about meat. That is what the destruction of the Amazon is about. And if you want to stop the destruction of the Amazon, we have to stop giving money to people who produce meat.
Bom, a gente está perto de encerrar.
We are reaching the end of our roundtable, even though it's such an interesting debate. We have a question here from the audience from Solange Serapião. This is a question addressed to Jonathan. And if you believe that the contact with the environment will be a path for Americans to rediscover a spiritual path or a spiritual side.
I do. In part because the problem is so large and the changes that are required of us are so large. It's not a question of making one or two behavioral changes. We need to rethink what it is to be successful. We need to rethink what it is to have enough. The American dream has, until now, always meant one thing, which is I will have more than my parents had. That's not a joke. That's the American dream. And when America was a country of immigrants, of people who came over because they were oppressed, because they had no other place to practice their religion, to practice their culture, or simply to survive, then that American dream made sense. It made sense for my grandmother to have an American dream that her life would be better than her parents. Her parents were murdered. It made sense for my mother to have the American dream that her life would be better than her mother's, because her mother grew up, in a wood shack with a dirt floor without access to any kind of education, because she was a woman, because she was Jewish. It does not make sense for my dream to have more than my parents. My parents had enough. We need to find a way to say we have enough, and for our instinct to attain not to be about attaining money and not to be about attaining power, but attaining contentment and attaining peace. We cannot save the planet without that, and that will create, I think, a kind of spiritual shift.
Bom, a gente tem mais uma pergunta aqui para Márcia. É uma pergunta do Adilson
We
Roberto
have a
Gonçalves.
question for Márcia from Adilson Roberto Gonçalves. Márcia, do you believe that a policy for the Native people will also be a way to save everyone else? Yes, yes. We fight for policies that will contribute with all nations, not only with this nation, but all nations in Brazil and the world, of course. So the right to quality education, health, to live in the city with all these different structures, obeying, of course, our way of life, our idea of what it is to have an education and what is politics. Because to consider it in the Native population and believe that they do not do politics, we do politics too. We have different strategies of resistance even before we had contact with the white world, so to speak. This is what we do. We have organizations, we have associations, we have resistance, and we have been fighting along with all the other Native population. Bibi is one of them, and they are constantly fighting on behalf of a greater good. It's not one single person, it's a nation. I forgot my microphone on mute. So, Márcia, Jonathan, thank you so much for your participation. It was wonderful to talk to you. Thank you all of you who are watching us. Unfortunately, we have to close our meeting now. It was a pleasure to be here with you, with all of you, and thank you so much for your participation, and I see you next time. I would just like to say a final word. If you want to see my work and the things I do, I have at Márcia Kambeba on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, all with the same name, at Márcia Kambeba. Thank you, Flip.
Should we leave the meeting?